Hello, Eileen Davidson here with the International Foundation of Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Go With Us program. I'm going over one of the sessions that I found quite interesting at the American College of Rheumatology Conference 2023 in San Diego. It was titled 1,000 Tiny Deaths Attending to the Grief in Patients with Rheumatic Diseases. I know myself, having gone through the grief process of living with a rheumatic disease, this one really stuck out to me. Also because it was one that I haven't really seen addressed much before in any of the conferences I've gone to. And I learned a few things that I thought were quite important that I'm really excited to share back with the community. The main thing was identifying different types of grief and why that is important, and how our care providers may need to start doing this and start addressing grief into the journey of living with rheumatic conditions more. Some form of grief don't require medical attention, however, some do for sure. They highlighted also that 62% of people with RA have anxiety and 32% have depression, which making it the most common comorbidities. I have seen a different amount of numbers in that before. I believe it might be higher, but emotional distress in patients with rheumatic conditions is actually increasing. They're noticing that up to 50% of kids with GIA also have a mental health condition. And they were talking about the difference between loss, which is including the death of functioning, having something meaningful taken away from you. So that's the experience. And how grief is the emotion, cognitive, functional, and behavioral response to loss. It is the result. So we all go through loss. Being diagnosed with rheumatic disease, there's a lot of things that we lose, from a big scale and to a small scale. What I found really the most interesting thing about this session, though, is that they describe different forms of grief and not just the stages of grief. I knew about anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance, but I've never heard these talked about before, so I thought it was interesting to actually finally get to see a session. So it was a clinical social worker who was going on about these, and they also themselves lived with rheumatic conditions, so they described it absolutely perfectly. But they went over uncomplicated grief. Sorry. This is the normal, healthy, protective, and not pathological grief that we experience. Everybody experiences this. It's after we lose somebody. Acute grief, which is experienced closely after a loss occurs, this is the early response. So this could be like loss of a job, loss of a parent, that kind of thing. Now, integrated grief, which is functional grief, and what people with chronic illness should aim for. This is where we can adapt and function, and that's important for people living with a chronic illness because there are so many different tiny little losses throughout our journey with chronic disease. Grief isn't, and loss isn't just one experience for us, it's a multiple. Now, a diagnosis of prolonged grief, the people who don't move into integrated grief, this is where it needs that medical help, either with professionals or medications. And it could be or not be connected to somebody living with depression. Anticipatory grief, grief that hasn't happened yet. This is like when rheumatic patients are worried about not being able to have children or told that we can't, or we're grieving things like not being able to go to school because their health will get in the way. Things that actually haven't happened yet, which I think we can all agree. I decided to not have any more children because of my disease. And I grieved a little bit about that, even though I didn't really want more kids. And then ambiguous loss. This is not to do with death, but it's profound sense of loss. And this is what rheumatic disease patients go through, because we didn't die, but we lost, you can say, parts of ourselves after diagnosis. They also highlighted with Rebecca from the Arthritis Foundation some real patient experiences of what grief looked like that I really resonated with. Some of it can be appearance of what medication does to us, mood face, weight gain, deformities and scars, loss of things we could do every day before our diagnosis or as our disease progresses, parenting struggles, and how we can't really be like other moms or parents. Each new health crisis, there is an added more new amount of grief And every time she experiences surgery, she feels the stages of grief again, including bargaining. Do I really need this surgery? And I related to that because it's sometimes I don't want to do things for my health because it's such a setback. And they also highlighted that it's very important for rheumatologists to start addressing this because they can help patients get through it by referring to them to the right physician, so like a clinical social worker, counseling, psychiatrist, psychologist, support groups, and maybe even medications that can help them get through their individual grief. But yeah, I thought that session was really important and interesting, and I do think that rheumatologists need to also talk more about the loss and the grief and mental health side that come with this condition. And I know that I learned quite a bit, though I didn't know about those different types of grief. So I would have to say this is probably one of my favorite sessions of ACR this year. Anyways, thanks all. Have a great day.